Never before seen. So many questions on the first day. I was thinking that I was trying to think of maybe a talk I could give because there wouldn't be any questions. But now it looks like we might need to put more paper out. So, okay, we'll see if we can get through these. Before I start with the questions, I'll just remind everybody there's Qigong, and it's in the conference hall, which is just this building, this largish building right over here, kitty corner to this hall. So that's where the Qigong is for anybody who's interested. And I'll be leading that at 4:45 each day. Could you speak a little louder for the hearing impaired? I think the hearing impaired, maybe if you could sit closer to the front too, because I thought if we turn the speakers up too high, it might be too loud for some people. But yeah, we can. It's not going to be perfect, so you might have to adjust yourself a little bit as well. We don't have the ideal sound system here. Oh, this is blank. Okay. Any suggestions or encouragement regarding keeping precepts while living outside a retreat or monastic setting? Thank you. Yeah, I don't know if I can give that long of an answer to this one. But it's a very good question. One of the main ways we can keep precepts outside of monastery or retreat setting is to be around other people who are also keeping precepts. So it is going to be more difficult to keep the precepts outside of a monastery setting if we don't have Dhamma friends or if we aren't around people who are also keeping precepts. So it is seeking out community, and we will end up, if we really are keen and ardent in terms of wanting to keep precepts, then we will naturally start to be surrounded by people who are doing that as well. And it's a tough one, because sometimes we might have friends that are close to us, and we may be interested in keeping precepts, and they may not be interested in keeping precepts. And it's inevitable that if we're keen on the precepts, we'll end up drifting apart, even though you might care about them very much and want to help them and always be there for them. It's inevitable that because you might have friends who aren't keeping the precepts, and because you're keen on keeping the precepts, people who have different interests, it's natural that you'll gravitate towards others who will have the same interests. And it's kind of sad, but that is how it goes. So that's probably the main thing. Also, cultivating faith, saddha. Try to think of another word other than faith, because sometimes people don't like that word. But the Buddha said sila saddha sampanno, which means the precepts are perfected through faith. So when we start to maybe trust is a good word, trust that the precepts bring benefit to ourselves and others. So if we have a very strong trust in the power of the precepts and the efficacy of keeping precepts, then we will also naturally tend in that direction. I'll leave that as short reflections on that for now. Body and mind feels separated. In between there's the breath. How and what method do you recommend to help both body and mind become oneness? Not so sure I have a method for that. this question, it's more like maybe having to address the way it's asked. There's some assumptions being made in a question, in the way this is being asked, that the body and mind has to become oneness. That's the assumption. And so maybe a better way to look at it would be, we're always looking for connection. We're always looking for connection. We might feel a sense of alienation, so we're looking for some sort of connection. So maybe rather than thinking in terms of body and mind, perhaps thinking in terms of, trying to think in terms of feeling and mindfulness of feeling. It's natural that there will be a sense of connection once we once we come into the present and we aren't proliferating as much about the past and the future. And a method for that is actually death contemplation, which is something that we do as practitioners. We do that all the time, and this is forest Dhamma, so contemplating arising and passing away. This is part of death contemplation. This is something that actually can bring us back into the present, and we might feel very content and connected then when we do that. But also sometimes our mind might shrink away or shy away from those types of contemplations. So really, when there's that sense of connection, all of the teachings of the Buddha lead to that sense of connection. Death contemplation is one of the main ones. So death contemplation is also just one part of reflection on impermanence, anicca anusati. So all of these reflections and really the cultivation of mindfulness in general will lead to a sense of connection. I tend to, oneness is a little bit vague, a little bit, I think coming back to more like words like connection or embodiment, groundedness. That's Ajahn Krudama was bringing up some words last night, or actually this morning. Spaciousness, cool, spacious, clear, fresh, bringing some words to mind to help us get in touch with those feelings. How can I tell if joy knowing, I can't read this, during the retreat is skillful or harmful for me? I'm not quite sure what that says. Maybe I'll come back to that. Can you read that? Journaling, maybe?
Yeah, I'm not sure what it is either. It's a little hard to read. Could be journaling. Whoever asked this question, you want to? You don't have to. It's one word. It's hard to read. Journaling might make sense.
Journaling. Maybe it's journaling. Well, this is another question where I might sidestep it a little bit. One thing with whatever we do, with Dhamma practice, there's these different, one of the factors of stream entry is to practice Dhamma according to Dhamma, not Dhamma according to me. So there's this atta tipataya, which is to practice in a self-centered way, and then there's Dhamma dipataya, which is to practice Dhamma according to Dhamma, or Dhamma nu Dhamma patipada is another way to say it. So it's practicing Dhamma with reference to Dhamma rather than with reference to me. And so whatever we do, rather than asking ourselves, how can I tell if this is skillful or harmful for me, maybe asking ourselves just, how can I tell if this is skillful or harmful? And then stopping there. And we're not just seeing how it affects us, but maybe how it affects others as well. And so with whatever we do, seeing if it's just skillful or harmful in general, and then maybe working a little bit to depersonalize things, which in itself is very skillful. Some people requesting a Dhamma talk sometimes like singing a song. According to precept number 7, it's considered entertainment. I'm confusing it. If I take the 5 precepts, it should be okay to do that. But if I'm taking the 8 precepts, that maybe I shouldn't do that. Lately, I haven't seen quite a uniform way of requesting a Dhamma talk. Thank you so much, Ajahns. Yeah, that's taking it a little bit too far with precept number 7. Really, the way it's talked about in the suttas is going to shows, attending shows, like we wouldn't go to a movie theater or something like that, or go to a concert. However, if somebody's on the 8 precepts, really have to kind of take the spirit of the rule as well. So a really good example of this, and yeah, it's okay to kind of express oneself with requesting the Dhamma talk, or even with the chanting. You could take it too far by saying maybe the chanting is singing, which it is kind of a form of singing. We're doing 3 tones, and we are getting into it. Some people might like to really get into the chanting itself, and but to hold it lightly, the Buddha was very practical. So what we're looking at is if we're using entertainment. The translation of this very long 7th precept, we translated it very shortly as entertainment, beautification, and adornment. But then it's this really long precept, Nacha Gita Warita Visuka Dasana. So it's like singing, dancing, partying. That's like literally what it's meaning. So, if you're getting up to request the Dhamma talk and you're kind of doing some sort of really intense expression session, then maybe that would come under it if you're doing a concert and adding music to it or something. But also we have to look at what's the effect, not just on ourselves but on others. And so probably a good example of like how this precept shouldn't be held. So it's totally okay to take the 8 precepts and do a sing-songy Dhamma talk request. That's not a problem at all. However, and like to look how, because we're always looking at harmony in human relationships as well. So like there's an example of someone I talked to not too long ago who was wanting to undertake the 8 precepts in their life. And then, so then they didn't go to their partner's piano recital. And so at first I'm talking to this person, they're like, yeah, relationships on the rocks. And I was like, oh, okay, well, what's going on? Like, well, they don't like me taking the 8 precepts. And I said, well, can you talk about that a bit more? And like, well, I didn't go to my partner's piano recital. So they're okay with all these precepts with me carrying, but then like, this one thing where they're expressing themselves, and this is like, so it's like my response to that is, well, you can go not for the sake of the entertainment, but your primary intention is to support them. Your primary intention is to not go rock out at a piano recital. Your primary intention is to support your partner. So that's not breaking the precept, in my opinion. In fact, I would say it's blameworthy to not go. And so it's really the intention. It comes back to the intention, the way we hold it, and so if if our intention is to listen to a Dhamma talk and we do a sing-songy Dhamma talk request, our intention wasn't to sing a song, it was to request a Dhamma talk. But if our intention is to be like, yes, this is, I don't care about the Dhamma talk, all I care about is, that I get to sing, at least temporarily, then, maybe you have to look at that intention. The situations where I find it most difficult to let go and where the strongest sense of self asserts itself are situations of responsibility. For example, caring for aging parents or producing a good report/document for my work colleagues. Any thoughts on how to work with this? These are all these questions have a certain thread going through them. They're all day one questions. So as the mind is starting to settle, we're all thinking about our lives. Everybody's considering, what they're doing in their lives and how to hold it. So the questions might shift and change over the coming days. They're more towards details about meditation, but now most of them are about our kind of daily lives. Yeah, that's just the thing. I don't really, with questions like this, there's no real technique for necessarily how to work with it other than just to keep practicing, or say the practice itself. It's inevitable that we're going to run up against things that we can't let go of. And Ajahn Amaro has been visiting Abhayagiri, so he uses this term. These days he's got this term, unentangled participation. So letting go, of course, in a Dhamma sense, doesn't mean just not doing our duties. So letting go is definitely, we can still be participating, but in an unentangled way. So we might have relatives who speak harshly to us, or people who aren't Dhamma practitioners who don't see any fault in just criticizing us or blaming us for something, and that they might see that as just something that should be done, that's normal. It's not blameworthy according to the world. But then we might feel, as meditators, as Dhamma practitioners, we might feel very sensitive to these things, and we can be very hurt by them, and it can be quite unpleasant to come into contact with people who maybe aren't working at training their mind. And then as we're doing this, we might think, okay, we'll get this came up for me when I would visit my parents, and as monks we have 30 different rules about how we eat, and like we don't open our mouths while we're eating, or we do just like very minor protocols and very minor etiquette standards around eating. And I remember starting to find fault, like watching, say like my dad eat or something, and it's like something totally normal in the world, how people would just get really into eating, and thinking like, why doesn't he follow those 30 Sakya rules? Oh, right. If you're not a monk, you don't have to follow them, and it's not blameworthy at all. These are just etiquette standards for monks. So we can't always apply our own standards to others, because the standards of the world in general are going to be different. So really it's just showing respect, these general qualities of showing respect, trying to relate to people coming from where they're at, not really trying to teach. In a way, if we're able to be totally okay with how other people are, that is a good teaching. That is something that they'll take note of. But if we get frustrated with other people for acting the way they do, then chances are they're not really going to take note of how we're practicing or any good things that we're doing. But if we're just fully accepting of others, then they'll start to feel a little bit more comfortable around us, and then they might open up in a way that is helpful for them and for us. So just coming back to that sense of just respect and kindness, this is very important, especially with, say, something like aging parents, where most parents just want respect from their children. They don't want to be told how to be or what to do. So they just want to be shown that gratitude, respect, thankfulness, appreciation, that can be very helpful in situations like this. What's all the tape about? It's a hallowed tradition. Hi, Ajahn. Can you explain no self? Thank you. No, because it's not no self, it's not self. So no self is, there are these different, what the Buddha termed extreme views. So there's three different ways of looking at self. There's self, there's no self, and then there's not self. So self is atta, no self is called virata, and not self is anatta. So the Buddha talks about the five khandhas as not self. So, and as a simplification, rather than talking about form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, which can be a bit abstract, we can just say body and mind. So body and mind is not me, not mine. So to understand not self, we say body and mind, or we could just talk about the body. Let's just talk about the body. This body is not me, not mine, not myself. So that's anatta. The body is anatta. If the body did belong to me or was mine, then it wouldn't, I wouldn't lose it at some point if it really belonged to me. So there's a sense of what we call the sense of self, and that's what we work with through the practice. And the sense of self, one of the reasons we have a sense of self is there's a mental factor whereby everybody has this, will tend to try to prop up a sense of self in order to feel a sense of stability. But then the problem with the sense of self is that we feel we have to prop it up, we have to protect it, we have to be a certain way, we have to be somebody. And so we might want to be somebody who has all sorts of good qualities and who is getting rid of all sorts of bad qualities. And this can give us a sense of stability, but in a way it's a false sense of stability. So the realization of not self, the mind might shy away from being able to say, this body is not me, not mine. The mind shies away from that because we feel like, well, if this body is not me, not who I am, not mine, not myself, what? That's kind of scary. So that might, if I was to see this body as not me, not mine, then I would feel unmoored, I would feel shaken. And yet the opposite is really the case. So when the mind starts to really see the body as not me, not mine, then there's a sense of unshakability. Why is that? There's a sense of unshakability because then, if the body were to become lost, well, I already saw it was not me, not mine anyway, so there's no sense of loss. Ultimately, at the time of death, then it's just going according to its nature. And so the sense of self, or the non-realization of anatta, that's one of the root causes, or you could say the root cause of suffering. So what we're looking at is trying to stop suffering through the practice. And it's not just telling ourselves this body is not me, not mine, but it's through insight and investigation, through mindfulness practice, and usually over a long period of time, not over a short period of time. Very rare that any of us would get this quickly. Through investigation, mindful attention over time, then we start to see these things. And it really starts with this three characteristics, anicca, dukkha, anatta. So first we would investigate the body as not lasting, not constant, not stable, so i.e. impermanent. And if it's impermanent, how can I keep it? I can't keep it a certain way. It's just following its nature. it experiences pleasure and pain. And I can't make it experience pleasure all the time and never experience pain. The mind wants that, we want that, but we can't do that. It's just constantly changing. So if it's constantly changing, it's an unsatisfactory condition. How could that be considered something that's me and mine? Or why would we even want it to be me and mine? So these are the contemplations that we do all the time with our investigations. But it also doesn't mean necessarily we don't have to think all the time. We don't have to be thinking those things all the time. But that's why we meditate. When the mind is more calm, it can start to see these things a bit more clearly, how the body is always in flux. This is Kaya Nupassana, the contemplation of the body. So that's the beginning of it. Of course, I can't truly explain it. This takes a lifetime of practice to look into these things. But those are some beginning points.
Interject one possible thing with the question at the beginning of no self. And I just wanted to add, if you pick that up from the morning chanting, which we had in the Triple Gem, I think we probably have to own up to the fact that maybe we're doing a little disservice when we translate it as we do, there is no self. It's not a great translation, so it kind of threw me for many years.
Yeah, the correct translation of that is all conditions are not self. That would be because that's sabbe sankhara anicca, sabbe dhamma anatta. All phenomena are not self. Not there is no self in the created. I mean, technically it's correct to say there's no self in the created or the uncreated, but the phrase no self is misleading. So we don't want to say no self. We want to say there is that all phenomena are not self. That's more correct, more of a correct translation. Body is not self. Had to get a knee surgery, have to change positions more than I used to. Back when I was young. Two questions. One, please give us some guidance on how to touch, see, or experience consciousness that is before it arises or as it's arising. How to mute perception from influencing it whenever you think it's appropriate. Well, that's like some super subtle stuff. So, that's like things that are happening lightning quick. So, I don't know if I have any advice about that, just because I don't think I can do it. Consciousness, I think with consciousness, sense consciousness, so seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and then the sixth sense base is the mind and thoughts, mental formations. But we can use seeing and hearing as an example here that rather than trying to see consciousness as it's arising, something I've found helpful is trying to see what's influencing us to be directing our consciousness in a certain way. So whatever I see or hear or smell, to do that, I have to choose. I have to say, okay, I'm going to look at this. I'm going to listen to this. And that's what I call the director. So trying to see the director, who is the director, what's directing the consciousness. And then that's really what we need to look at. That's the cause of suffering. That's tanha, that's craving. Or is the Dhamma directing it? So who's directing the consciousness at any given time? And that's what's really very subtle, very hidden in the background. But to see it as it's arising, that's going to take probably very, very, very subtle, very deep samadhi, to be able to see the arising and passing away of consciousness as it's happening. And perception from influencing it. I think that it's more the director that's influencing it. It's whatever craving, not just craving, but biases. There's this word agati in Pali, which means bias. So different biases affecting how we pay attention to things. It's like with breath meditation. Sometimes we might wonder why can't the attention stay on the breath? And the attention keeps getting pulled away from the breath, and we might get frustrated because we say, well, I want the attention to be on the breath. But actually, we don't truly want the attention to be on the breath. So we can actually investigate, why is it getting pulled away? Who is pulling away? What's the director in the background? How is it? So the consciousness, what we're really paying attention to even in our thoughts, it's getting pulled away from the breath because deep down inside, there's something more interesting to look at. There's something more interesting to listen to. There's something more interesting to focus on than the breath, according to what we really want deep down inside. So we don't really want to focus on the breath because we don't truly, on a very deep level, see the benefit of it yet. So this is it's good to contemplate and think about that. What's affecting it in the background, and to try to catch that. Not easy, so don't be discouraged if you're not able to see the director at this time. The Buddha said consciousness is like a conjurer's trick. So there's an illusion happening, and it's, but what the Buddha's talking about here is this conjurer is very good. He's a very good magician. You're not at all able to see through those tricks at this time. You have to really investigate, really look closely. Please talk more about doubt and how it arises due to other hindrances. I have no doubt in the Dhamma, but sometime in my ability or in the world caring about it. It hinders me from carrying out my mission as a teacher. Thank you. Doubt is, I think doubt is probably one of the most painful and damaging hindrances. It's the fifth of the 5 hindrances to meditation practice. And doubt just causes all sorts of suffering. We can cause all sorts of suffering for ourselves through doubt. And doubt is also, the word in Pali is vicikiccha. So doubt, this vicikiccha is one of the 3 things that passes away at the time of stream entry. So we can use that, the Buddha's teachings on stream entry, in order to contemplate doubt. And the way that doubt is seen in terms of what falls away at stream entry, it's twofold. So one is, one no longer has any doubt about Buddha Dhamma Sangha, the efficacy of the teachings and so on, and the reality of Nibbana. But also, it's seen in other suttas, it's seen in another way, which I find perhaps more useful, and that is, one is no longer has any doubt about what's right and wrong. One no longer has any doubt about what's wholesome and unwholesome. One no longer has any doubt about what's skillful and unskillful. So that type of doubt is thinking like, is this right? Is this wrong? Is this a good thing to do? You've developed a compass. You've developed a sort of virtue compass that you're able to actually see without a doubt what is skillful, what's unskillful. So that is, I think, if we're constantly vacillating, or we don't know what's skillful, what's unskillful, what's right, what's wrong, that's going to cause the mind to vacillate quite a bit. So for me, I find that a bit more useful. In terms of overcoming doubt, it's just to keep practicing, there's no shortcut, there's no quick way to do this. It's that the more we investigate, the more we cultivate mindfulness, the more we're going to see the truth of the Buddha's teachings. And the more we try to prove the teachings wrong, the more we're going to see that they're correct and legitimate. And so that's really how to just work away at it. It also takes courage. So sometimes the doubt can come through just this bias of fear, Abhayagiri, this fear bias working in the background, that director, the fear director that may be very subtle. We may not even be a fearful person, but there may be this subtle thing working in the background that's kind of stoking those doubts. I want to be sure I'm doing the right thing. I want to be sure that, but really we can't really be sure until we try things out, until we investigate it for ourselves. So if we were to overcome doubt, then we would know for sure whether journaling is skillful or unskillful for us. Mind, chitta, consciousness, knowing mind. How, parentheses, technique, to consider, to center myself in the knowing mind. If I remind myself of that chitta or knowing is just an emptiness as it is this correct way of reminding myself? Again, the way this question is asked is, it's maybe a good way to hold everything is just knowing, not necessarily like me in the center of the knowing mind, but just knowing. So a lot of the time, and this happens in the West, not so much in Thailand, just because of our worldview and how we're brought up, and we want to objectify the knowing. So we sometimes at the monastery we might get questions like, what is it? What is the knowing? Is it, where is it? Where is it located? What is it? And is it some sort of bright light that has this knowing quality, or is it, some material function of the pineal gland, or, what is it? Where is it? And yet the knowing is just the knowing. The knowing is only known by its function. That's all it is. The knowing is it just knows. The knowing is the knowing. That's why we say the knowing. We can't describe it any other way. So, and the knowing is always there. The knowing is always there whether we're awake or asleep. There's always this knowing. But the knowing is divided. The knowing is divided. It's not united. So the knowing is divided. It's dividing out the eye, out the ear, out the nose, out the tongue, out the body, out the mind objects. That's what we call. So knowing, the word in Pali is jnana. And consciousness, the word for consciousness, is literally divided knowing, which is vijnana. So the knowing, we won't be able to just have the knowing. It's always going to be the knowing of something. So until nibbana, it's going to be the knowing of something. If it's just the knowing without an object, you don't need to ask any more questions. This question wouldn't have been written. But until that point, it is knowing of something. So it's knowing the breath, knowing an object of light in the mind, knowing something. But it's good to contemplate that there is always that knowing. If there is something presented to us, we are knowing it. You're knowing this talking right now. That's because of the knowing that you can listen to me answering questions. So that is a function of the knowing. The knowing just knows. So probably leave it at that. Don't want to talk about that too much. Okay, one side here it says, "Dear Venerable Sirs," and what does the other side say? The Buddha gave 5 recommendations of practice to get over/forgive a person who caused you harm or a person you dislike. 1, practice loving kindness. 2, have compassion for yourself and the person. 3, equanimity, be neutral to them. 4, do not bring this person to mind. Yeah, this is called the removal of resentment sutta, I believe. 5, all beings are the owners of their karma. What is this sutta called? Where can I read it? I'm really bad at quoting chapter and verse. Does anybody else know? Actually, there is another one, though. I don't know the sutta, but there is another technique that's maybe from another sutta, another group of 5, and one is give a gift. One is give a gift to that person to remove resentment towards them. Okay, I've got 1 more minute. I already addressed this one. Where does the mind reside in one's body? In the heart? In the brain? Thank you, sadhu. So if we'll say the mind, the chitta, we can define that as the knowing for the time being. It is non-local. It doesn't reside anywhere. And it isn't even in it. It's just known by its function, which is to know. And a while back, Samanera Himiko reminded me of a teaching of one Tibetan Rinpoche who said, the knowing is the most mysterious thing in the universe. So I'll leave you with that for now. Wow, that was a lot of questions for day 1. So it's 2:15, and by this watch anyway, that one's slower, 2:13. But we can either change postures and or we can keep sitting at this point, and we'll do these 45-minute bell ringing sessions. But again, people can get up or change postures whenever they like, just to come and go quietly from the hall. And we'll do 3 45-minute periods here until so at 4:30, and that's the end of the afternoon practice period. And then at 4:45, for anybody interested in qigong, we can meet in the conference hall, which is right over there, or you can keep practicing